live in a day and an age where we have some issues with authority, don't we? In fact, I've met a few people who just want to be left alone. They just want to make their own decisions, depend on their own choices. They don't want anyone involved in their lives. And I can't say that I blame them too much. We've seen authority and how it's acted out in our world. We've seen what it does. Those in authority, they seem to be so power hungry, don't they? Can't seem to get enough power. And corrupt? Yeah. Now, not all those in authority are corrupt. Not all those in authority act like this, but we've seen enough that it sways our opinion of authority. And our kings and our presidents, they no longer lead the troops into battle, do they? Like they used to? They lead from far off places. They can't see what we're going through. They can't relate to us. Think about it. Our troops follow a leader that they've never met, much less known. It's pretty hard to get real excited about a leader who's not there with you day in and day out, experiencing what you experience. What do those in authority know about me? They don't know me. And if our human leaders are like this, then what must God be like? Like it or not, our opinions about authority actually do affect the way we look at God. What is God like? Some of you are there, not sure what to think about God. He is an authority, isn't he? Do we trust him? Well, fortunately for us, this skeptical view of authority is not the description that we get from the Bible about God. Did you know that? One of the common images of God in the Bible is as a shepherd, a good shepherd. The little girl in the video, I think, did a really good job of sharing one of the more famous shepherd passages in the Bible. You guys know where that's found? Psalm 23. Now, even without knowing much about shepherding, I think we can get a feel for God as our good shepherd, couldn't we? What that might be like. And he certainly doesn't sound like someone that we should be threatened by. God the good shepherd. I want to spend some time this morning just looking at God, and specifically Jesus, as the good shepherd. And I want us to evaluate in our hearts what kind of authority, what kind of king Jesus would be in our life if we would allow that authority in our life. Whether we know much about shepherding or not, we're going to kind of work through that. Would it be better to be alone? Would it be better to be on our own? Would it be better for us to be making all of our decisions? Or would it be better to have a good shepherd in our life? What do you think? So, as we begin to look at Jesus as the good shepherd, there is one major issue. And the issue is that we don't know anything about shepherding. I mean, how do we even relate to this metaphor? In fact, I think we're beginning to lose this metaphor because we just don't understand it. We have to work at it a little bit to really get to the bottom of this, to figure out, what does it mean for God to be my shepherd? So before we get started, there's a few things I'd like to just point out that might help us. We need to understand what a shepherd is like, don't we? And if God is our shepherd, what does that make us? Sheep. What are sheep like? Drove around a lot yesterday, saw a lot of sheep. What does it mean for us to be sheep under the care of a shepherd? And is that something that we'd even want? So just a few facts about sheep. I'm definitely not an expert about sheep, but I can share with you what I've discovered. And really, since this is really one of the major metaphors of descriptions about God in the Bible, this is really one that we should look at, that we really should study and understand. How are we sheep? How is he a shepherd? So did you know that sheep are very social animals? Sheep are most comfortable when they're in the presence of at least 4 or 5 other sheep. They like to be together, and when they're grazing together, they kind of maintain this visual link between each other. They seem to be designed to be together. And I'd venture to say that human beings are designed to be together in community. Now, if you want to talk to people who raise sheep, and I have, they will tell you just how dumb sheep are. Anyone raise sheep in here? Okay. That it's really not a compliment to be compared to a sheep, as the Bible compares us to sheep. But, did you know that scientists have tested sheep? And there's a lot of potential there. In fact, scientists at the University of Cambridge recently discovered that sheep have the brain power equal to rodents or monkeys or even humans on some tests. That they are perennial underachievers. They don't ever live up. They can be so much more than they are. Who else can you think of? Sheep depend heavily on their vision. They have excellent peripheral vision. It's kind of interesting. They can see behind themselves without even turning their heads. Now, there's another thing you have to know about their vision. They have a very poor depth perception. They can't see immediately in front of their noses. Isn't that kind of odd? So they can see everything else that's going on. They can see what everyone else is doing, but they can't see where they're headed. Doesn't that sound a lot like some humans you might know? Frank, did you just? Okay. Vicky. I didn't say Vicky. He said Vicky. Just so you know. And sheep have excellent hearing. Did you know that sheep have excellent hearing? They can actually turn their ears and point it towards wherever they need to listen. So if they really wanted to listen, they could. They do an excellent job when they want to. Some other interesting things about sheep from my research of sheep tending, the way they raise sheep nowadays is completely different than the way they used to raise sheep back in the first century. Some of the differences, they raise sheep today in these big pens and huge farms. So they don't really need to move the sheep around hardly at all because they bring the food to the sheep, and the sheep are safe in all these big fences, right? So they just kind of settle in there. So what's the role of a shepherd? There isn't a role for a shepherd. They don't need shepherds anymore. And while there are farms who are most interested in their wool, most farms, farming for sheep is farming for meat. So the farms don't have them year to year. They don't get to know the sheep. They rotate through them. They don't develop any long-term relationships with the sheep. So no shepherds, no long-term relationships. Back in the first century, it was a completely different story, though. They had smaller flocks. They used them for their wool. They used them for their dairy. They needed those sheep. They would keep the sheep as long as they could. And they didn't have these big, huge professional farms. They were required to move them around to find food. They couldn't just bring food to them. The shepherds led them to food. The shepherds took care of them. The shepherds protected them. And this is really more the picture of what we're looking for when the Bible is presenting God as the Good Shepherd. Depending on the time of year, they had different approaches to grazing. In the winter and in the spring, grazing was very abundant, so they could actually put them in a more permanent pen, a big, huge pen. They would put all the flocks, several flocks together in a big pen, and they could graze there together. Now, you may be asking, after you've combined them together, how would you know how to separate them at the end of the season? Did they mark them? Did they put tags on their ears? What did they do? They didn't do any of that stuff because the sheep knew the call of their shepherd. When it came time to pull the sheep out, the shepherd just simply had to whistle or call or whatever they did, and his sheep would come running. They knew his voice. In the summer, grazing was a little scarcer. The shepherds had to take the sheep to the high country to find some grass. They had to find places, springs for water. They moved them around a little bit more, and they would use these small rock-walled areas to stay in overnight, to keep them in and keep the bad animals, the wild animals, out. And at that time, there were bears, there were lions, there were wolves in the region, so there were some concern about the sheep. So the shepherds, and you see that in this picture, the shepherds would keep the sheep safe by lying across the opening in the pen. The shepherd protected the sheep. So living day in and day out with their shepherds, learning to hear his voice, learning to trust him for food, for protection. What were shepherds like? They were servants, weren't they? They were servants to the sheep. They helped the sheep find food. They would protect the sheep. They would even risk their lives for the sheep, right? I mean, they didn't have shotguns back then. They'd be using a stick or a sling. If you think about it, there's been some pretty drastic changes. Shepherding. Understanding what our relationship is with God as the Good Shepherd. So with this in mind, would you turn with me to John chapter 10? And would you listen for the Good Shepherd's voice this morning to see what he has for us? And look for the relationship that we have with Jesus as our Good Shepherd. What is it like? Now, to give some context to this passage in John 10, the story we're looking at this morning is connected to a passage that we looked at a few weeks ago, John chapter 9, where Jesus healed a blind man who was born blind. You remember that story? And if you remember, as soon as the man was healed by Jesus, life for the poor blind man, it became very complicated. After being confronted by the Pharisees, the blind man gets kicked out of the temple, right? It'd be, in essence, like us being kicked out of the church. I mean, could you imagine being kicked out of the church for being healed by Jesus? Well, Jesus doesn't let the poor guy walk off. He finds him, he tracks him down, and he invites him into his church. And Jesus moves straight from that story, John chapter 9, into this discussion about the Good Shepherd. He's addressing the Pharisees that were there. So think about this relationship that Jesus is describing, beginning with verse 1, John chapter 10. It says, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out." Now, if we didn't know anything about shepherding, now we're all experts, right? But if we didn't know anything about shepherding, this would be a little confusing to us. Wouldn't be confusing to them. They'd have been very familiar with what Jesus was talking about. But Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees here, who've just booted out this once blind man. They would have been very familiar, again, with this whole concept. And we already talked about the sheep pen that protected the sheep overnight. It was kind of a fenced-in area, and there's only one way in, one way out, and the gatekeeper protected that entrance, becoming the human gate. And the sheep, they could recognize the shepherd. First of all, because he would be the one entering through the gate. That's how they knew who the shepherd was. The gatekeeper would know the shepherd, and they would allow him access to his sheep anytime he wanted access to the sheep. So anyone trying to enter the sheep pen over the fence instead of through the gatekeeper, obviously the sheep would realize that, hey, that can't be good. He's intending harm to us, the sheep. So do you think there are those in our world who actually desire to harm us? Is it important to know who is on our side? Who has our back? So it was very important the sheep knew their shepherd. They knew who they could trust. Second, the sheep would know the shepherd by his voice, is what it says. They would listen as he called them out. This is very interesting to me. By name. He had names for every single one of them. Think about our relationship with God. God, the creator of the universe, knows you by name. He doesn't just say, hey, that church over there. He knows you by name. He's not some CEO of a huge corporation who doesn't even know the employees in his company, is he? He knows us. We matter to him. He's our good shepherd. The good shepherd knew his sheep well, and they knew his voice. How important is it to know his voice? They had this strong, this intimate relationship with the shepherd, the sheep. Verse 4 and 5, when he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice, but they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. So we have here the shepherd. He knew his sheep. He knew all of them. He knew when he had them all. He wasn't going to leave any behind. And then he would go out ahead of them. Kind of an interesting picture, isn't it? They would follow him, not because he was driving them, right? They would follow him because they trusted him. The good shepherd. I mean, you don't see here a harsh leader that's just kind of demanding all these things from his sheep, beating on them, yelling at them, do we? We see a picture of sheep willingly following their good shepherd. They trust him. And he's leading out front, right? So what does that mean? Who's the first to encounter trouble? The shepherd. This is so much different from our authority figures where they lead from behind in some safe place and they're sending out their troops ahead, right? That's not the authority we're talking about. We're talking about a good shepherd who's willing to go out in front. It's really what the Bible's describing is what Jesus wants, that relationship he wants with us. The shepherd and his sheep, they know each other so well that they will never follow a stranger, right? They know his voice, and they only follow him. When they hear a stranger's voice, they run away. They run to the safety of their shepherd, the one they know they can trust. Now, how nice would it be to know who you can trust? To know who will protect you? I mean, is that a minor deal when you're looking for someone to follow? At this point in the description, we see Jesus, in verse 6 here, the Pharisees don't understand what's going on. So Jesus starts back in. He's kind of repeating over and over these themes. Therefore, Jesus, in verse 7, said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out. They will find pasture. So Jesus is saying here that he's the gatekeeper. He's the shepherd that's going to protect his sheep. His sheep know him by name. And when you think about it, if you think about the formerly blind man, his sheep follow him because they trust him. His sheep know that the Pharisees are thieves and robbers. They're there to hurt the sheep, not to help them. But we have a good shepherd on our side. Verse 9, Jesus says again that he's the gate. Whoever enters through him into the sheep pen will be safe. There'll be opportunities for them to go in and out, find food, find protection, find direction from the shepherd. I mean, do we need that in this world? Then Jesus sums up the passage with verse 10. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Does that sound like a shepherd you'd want to follow? The verse is really pretty revealing. We do have reason to avoid some authorities in our world, don't we? There are some authorities out there that want to destroy us. But God is not that authority. Jesus came so that we might have life, not just any life, a life to the full. The Greek word here is kind of interesting because it's really best described from a verse in Psalm 23 that we just heard stated for us. Psalm 23:5 says, "My cup overflows." That's the fullness of life that is described here in this Greek word. It describes a life that is constantly gushing over the top in joy. Not just once, but all the time, just gushing with joy. I mean, does that sound like we live in a dangerous world, don't we? How is that even possible? Gushing with joy? Can that even be true? Well, David answers that in the very next verse, Psalm 23:6. He says, "Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Now, the presence of God for some people, as they look at God, they think fear God. Some people are looking at God saying, well, he's a control freak. He wants to control my life, ruin me. But David in Psalm 23 is telling us that God's presence means his goodness. His presence means his love. And his goodness and his love will follow me all the days of my life. Is that good news or bad news? It's good news. And we've seen in the passages that we looked at in the past few weeks, we've looked at the disciples without Jesus. You know, after he raised, while he was dead in the grave and they were thinking that he was dead, what were the disciples like? They're full of fear. They had the doors locked. They didn't know what to do. They were depressed. They were confused. But what did life look like in the presence of Jesus? Joy, peace. The Good Shepherd. So why is it so hard to allow God to be our God? Why do we have such an issue with authority? I mean, why is it so hard to give up our authority so that he might reign in our lives, so that he might bring us peace and joy and life gushing over? I mean, that doesn't seem to be too hard of a decision. Would you rather choose life by yourself, in your own strength, in your own wisdom, struggling here? I mean, why is it so hard for us to let him in? You know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think not everyone is this way. I think people have their different reasons for struggling with authority. But I think some Christians really decide to live defeated, struggling lives, not allowing the Spirit in to transform them. I think many of them are struggling with the concept of grace. Could it be really, I mean, is it really true that God is that loving? That God is that good? That he would be that good to me? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Why would he be that way? I mean, we're a little skeptical of the whole thing. I mean, we've been told in one way or another our whole lives that we aren't worth anything. We've had our hearts damaged to the point that we just can't believe that we are worth what God says that we are. Why would he love me that much? I mean, there just has to be a catch to this, doesn't there? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Why would he want to be my good shepherd like this? Remember the context of the passage that we're looking at in John 10. The Pharisees have been telling this blind man that he is no good. He's been no good his whole life. They haven't allowed him into the church. They don't allow him to come into worship in the temple because he's unclean, right? Ever since he was born, he's been told that he's no good. He's worthless. And even after Jesus heals the blind man, the Pharisees tell him that this encounter, this healing by Jesus, meant nothing. He still wouldn't be allowed into the temple. Still isn't worthy to be with God and worship him. But what is the message that Jesus is teaching? What is he talking about? Who tells the man that he's been man born blind? Who tells him that he's worthless in that story? Is it the good shepherd? Is it Jesus? Or is it the thief who jumps the fence and wants to destroy him? Who represents God and who represents the enemy who wants to steal, kill, and destroy? I mean, just flip back a page in John into chapter 8, and you'll find Jesus saying to the enemy, he's the father of all lies. He wants us to feel worthless, but he's lying. He wants to destroy us, but he's lying. He wants us to believe that we're worthless in the sight of God. Yeah, but Pastor, God was against the blind man, wasn't he? He was against him until Jesus got there. God hates us because of our sin. God hates us because of our sin? Is that true? It's a lie. That's the devil's message, isn't it? He's trying to trick us. How do I know? The Bible tells us that even while we were still sinners, what? Christ died for us. He didn't die for our sins because we deserved it. He died because he loves us. We are not worthless in the sight of God. Don't believe the lie. In Luke 15, we find another shepherd story, a story about a sheep that wanders off and gets lost. How does the good shepherd respond to this lost sheep? Does he go up and say, hey, too bad for him. I guess he blew it. He's on his own now. No. He goes after the lost sheep, doesn't he? He doesn't give up on him. He loves all of his sheep. And he rejoices, doesn't he? The Bible tells us that he rejoices when he finds the lost sheep and brings him home. That's what the good shepherd looks like. Don't believe the lie. It really, truly is an assault of the enemy. If we are struggling, know that you are loved. He wants you no matter what you've done. You are not worthless. Ran across a story that I think really helps with this idea, and I want to share it this morning. It's a story of a girl named Abby. Let me just read it to you. It says, the assault started as a young girl. There was something about me that seemed to aggravate my father. Something about me. Something that seemed to annoy him and repel him. And as I grew older, I only seemed to become more frustrating to him. I would ask him a question about how he was doing, and I would just watch as this look of annoyance filled his eyes. And I began to suspect that there was something deeply wrong with me. Something that made me unlovable, undesirable, something that was too much and not enough all at once. I tried endlessly to edit my personality. I tried to figure out the right way to be, the right way to say, right things to say in every context, in every relationship, so that I could maybe someday be accepted, seen as worthwhile, loved. And I lived mostly in fear that I was going to blow it. And that any moment the person I loved was going to turn on me, filled with contempt and disdain, and tell me how worthless I was. I'll just pause here for a moment and just say that we've all had situations in our life where we doubted our worth. We've all had things in our lives that has damaged our hearts. We've all learned to protect and shield ourselves from more pain, from more hurt. We don't want to risk it. And deep down inside of us, Just not sure if anyone could love us like God says that he loves us. I mean, how could that be true? It just can't be true. I mean, when we believe this lie, we are giving the enemy a stronghold into our heart. Listen as the journey continues. She says, even after receiving Jesus into my heart, the suspicion of something dark and wrong, it haunted me. I began to find myself especially anxious around animals and children, certain that in their piercing intuition, they would sense this darkness in me and my vain attempts to cover it up. And I would be exposed. One time while I was horseback riding, my horse knocked me against the limb of a tree. The limb ripped me off my saddle, and I tumbled down into the ground. My eyes were filled with hot tears, and my heart with the waves of self-contempt. The voice within me said, see, there is really something dark about you. The horse sensed it. Just wanted to get you off of him, whatever it took. There are people in our world that struggle with these kind of thoughts, that they just don't feel worthwhile. I don't know if you can relate to this story or not, but are you afraid that God just might not love the real you? Don't believe the lies. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Jesus has come that you may have life and have it gushing over. Life the way he's designed it, the Good Shepherd. Your heart's not wicked. In Christ, you are a new creation. The old self is gone. You are so important to Jesus that he laid down his life for you. John 10:11 says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. You are loved and you are revered by God. He wants you, and he wants to heal your broken heart. Would you let him? Let me read Psalm 23 one more time. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. And what could we lack if we're with him? He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. Do our souls need refreshed? Do our souls need healed and restored? He guides me along the right paths. Wouldn't it be nice to be guided down the right paths? And it says, for his name's sake. That's just the way he is. He loves his sheep. That's why he's doing this. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You are my protector. You are my guide. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. You spare no expense to honor me. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The presence of God is an amazing place to be. An amazing place to be. Don't avoid God because you don't feel worthy. Embrace him. I really don't know where you are this morning. I don't know if God's speaking to you about this. Do you know God as your good shepherd? Is today the day where your broken heart gets healed? When you decide to quit believing the lies about you, that you begin to see yourself as God sees you and believe the truth of what God is saying about you. Will this be the day that you trust his authority, his truth, the way he sees you, the Good Shepherd? Now, some of you may be avoiding allowing Jesus to be your king. Understand the fear and allowing someone to have authority in your life. But is it really better to be alone? Is it really better to be on your own? Is it really better to just go through life making your own choices and living with the consequences? He loves you. You can trust him. Don't hide from him. Let him be your good shepherd. He's not only a forgiver, he is a good king. You can trust him. He's a healer. He heals our hearts, our very broken hearts. He has the power to save us. Will you let him? Let's just close with a time of prayer. Lord God, I'm so thankful that you are our good shepherd. That you love us, that you take care of us, that you protect us, that you guide us, you provide what we need. That we can count on you. So thankful, Lord, that you know our name, that you know us. You still love us. Lord God, there are those here this morning that are hurting. Their hearts are hurting. Been hurting for a while. Been doing the best they can to cover it up. They don't feel worthwhile. They don't think they're worthy of your love. Would you speak to them this morning? Would you touch them? Would you help them to trust you? Would you heal their hearts, Lord, as they open up to you? Would you be their good shepherd? We need a good shepherd, Lord. We need you in our life. We need your healing touch. We love you.